Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Barry. Great episode, a lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, let's start off with Sally's situation this episode. Well, first, obviously, she's working on that Medusa show when she's in the writer's room, and I love that it's like, she's like, it's like, oh, he's saying, like, right, the reason why the character's the way she is because she's horny. It's like, yeah, then why is she turning people to stone and biting their dicks off or something? But everyone else in the writer room, I'm like, yeah, good thing you said that. Like, the reason why this guy is able to do what he's doing is because he was a writer. And I'm like, they make a joke of like, oh, he was a writer and everybody loves Raymond. I'm like, once again, this show is kind of inside like that. So I'm like, was he actually a writer on Everybody Loves Raymond? Is that adds an extra layer to the joke if he actually was? But then Sally sees Natalie, she's a showrunner or something. I'm like, oh my god, look at Natalie. I was like, oh, that's probably not good. Because, Sally was just running her own project. And it was such an important project to her. Now, like, Natalie's doing her own thing. And I was like, oh, I thought that's what she was said about. I didn't realize it until the elevator scene where Sally had, Natalie was apparently doing Joplin, but like a very different version of it. It's like they took the premise behind Joplin and she kind of did it on her own way. And the fact is, we see Natalie with her own assistant. I was like, oh man, this continuous cycle and stuff like that. Because the way she's kind of treating her assistant, same way she was treated for so long. Even before she became Sally's assistant, back when they were just in their classes, Sally still kind of treated her that way. So you're like, hey, at least she's getting her come up. She's doing her thing. And then Sally's in the elevator with her. I was like, ooh, Sally does not look happy. And then Sally proceeds to like tear her down and tear into her. It's like, you don't even have a daughter. It's like, neither do you, Sally. She starts screaming. I was like, oh my god. Because the Barry one was scary just because it's like, this one I just legitimately felt bad. The Barry one I felt bad and scared at the same time because it's Barry. The way he yelled, and I mean, maybe that's also supposed to show the parallels of just like Barry screaming and what that's like and Sally screaming. It's like, don't get it twisted. Barry's fucked up, but Sally's definitely got her issues too. It's like I've said it since day one, where ever since I first started watching the show, that Sally seems a little off. She seemed very like narcissistic. Not just seemed, she really is narcissistic and conceited, and it's just like, yeah, both Barry and her are like missing something, and they were kind of leaning on each other to kind of fill that void in each other to some extent. That's what I'm looking. But like the fact is, Sally went off on her, like scared, like even when she was like slammed her head beside her. I was like I said, it was more so like. You kind of felt, because also, like, I'm a little biased because I was like, don't scream at Natalie, because Natalie's so sweet, she's too pure for this world, but also, once again, my bias is because I love, Darcy, Carden, because so, to me, it's almost like seeing Janet from Good Place getting screamed at. I'm like, no, Janet's too pure for this world, she doesn't deserve that treatment. So it's a little of those blurred lines, I admit, and my bias kicked in that regard. Doesn't change it. Like, what Sally did was super fucked up, which is also stupid, because it's like, the moment the scene ended and she had her, like, Natalie, I had to stop myself from saying Janet, Natalie had her phone in front of her chest. I was like, was she recording Sally the entire time? It's like, yeah, you're less likely to get away with being an asshole nowadays when everyone literally has a recording device on them 24/7. She was literally on set recording a device before you went on your whole tirade, and partway through it, she was like, let me record this, and I was like, that blew up in Sally's face big time. I mean, some people still make the argument, asshole or not, a lot of assholes still have careers regardless, but it's like, oh, Sally kind of got canceled this episode because it went up and she was just kind of like, okay. And Lindsay's like, because she's like, oh, I should make an apology. I was like, ooh, that's the worst you can do, because we've seen it too much. Anyone who spent any amount of time on YouTube would be like, don't do that. Unless you have to put your sincere face on, because even then it feels disingenuous sometimes. Sometimes it might be better to put your apology in words than a video, because then people might start criticizing, like, oh, this was edited. What did you cut out? What did you cut around? And and even if you don't, like, there's been too many apology videos that you're just. But I mean, I guess it's a whole thing. Then I'm like, oh, don't do an apology. Lindsay was telling her not to do it, but it's too late. She did it, and I loved what she said. She said, my perceived, God, I forgot the exact words she used, but she used the word perceived in front of it. I was like, there was nothing perceived about that. That was straight up you yelling at her, calling her the C word multiple times. You called her to see, like, and she tried to be like, yeah, I get it, but she's also trying to say, like, right, this is what women, like, you know, women call each other this as, like, friends or whatever, and it's like, oh, it's said in Europe all the time. It's like, that, don't try to, like, the best thing you could do for an apology is like, I screwed up, I'm gonna do better. What did she do on it? She tried to justify her answer. It's like, no, that's where you screw up big time. An apology, just say you're sorry and be like, I made a mistake, I won't do it again. Don't try to justify your actions, you know. But it's like, because you didn't just call her the C word once, you called her the C word 4 times in different ranges. You were like, you C word, and you C word. You went in different ranges with it. That's wild. And once again, I'm so curious how her co-star Katie's gonna feel about this after, like, she called out Barry for that. So to see, which is so interesting because Katie and Natalie had that conversation about Barry's explosion of just like how crazy he was, and now it's like, yeah, and apparently the show she was working on dropped her, and now it's like, and Sally's justification, like, whoa, why am I getting penalized? I told the truth. It's like, yeah, told the truth. You can tell the truth without being an asshole. And even then, it's like, it's not being, there's a moment for, like, you know, it's like, oh, I'm sorry, I was hashtag telling the truth. I was like, oh, Sally, because Sally's backed into a corner and she's, like, clawing Natalie because, like, she's watching her career go flushing down the toilet. Like, yes, things didn't work out, but you had more of an opportunity of a career to keep going, and you kind of flushed that down the toilet. Because Lindsay's like, yeah, I can't work for you anymore. I'm gonna have to drop you as a client. She's like, go ahead. I can't work with I can't work with liars. And then Lindsay leaves, and you can just see that look on Sally's face, like, I fucked up. It's like, yeah. Once again, you know, we'll see how that works out. Telling the truth. I've seen it work out a couple days ago for a different character on a different show. Them speaking their truth kind of worked out in their favor. Didn't work out for Sally. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see where things kind of go for her going forward, especially once again you throw into parallels of like Barry. Like, once again, I think it's supposed to show like, oh yeah, they're both extremely messed up, flawed characters that, you know, like the fact is that just because it's understandable for her to be frustrated, but she should have handled that way differently. Didn't have to go through the trouble of calling Natalie out like that, especially Natalie, who's done nothing but be there for you and help you, but that why it cut even deeper. But still, it's like, yikes. So there's that. Then there's a whole situation with Barry this episode I thought was interesting. I love that, was it Sharon? Just like left him for dead, saw him choking, and just like covered his face and bounced. You could hear her driving away. And then when Barry wakes up later on, you're like, what the, okay? And then he walks out, and then like the water starts rushing because it's like he's at the beach, and then it starts hitting one of the nearby cars. I'm like, what the hell is going on? And then he goes onto the beach and he sees people on distance. I was like, what? Didn't even cross my mind to think like, oh man, this is Barry in a between life and death. Literally bouncing on a border. Like, I guess she didn't do a high enough dosage, so it wasn't enough to kill him. Maybe like if, you know, because he's a taller, bigger dude or whatever, maybe it didn't spread through his system enough to immediately kill him, so it's dragging it out. So there's that. But he ends up on that beach, and it's not till later on. The moment all those people there, I was like, are these all the people you killed? And he looks around and is like, oh yeah, you see a whole bunch of familiar faces over the course of the series. I love he turns to Chris and waves at him. Chris looks at him and like turns around like, are you waving at me? It's like, I think he's almost like, you really think I'm gonna wave back at you, bro? You murdered me along with everyone here. Shows you how many people's Barry killed over the years. That's a shit ton of people, Barry. Like, we know Barry's killed people, but fuck, dude, that's a lot of damn people. That's a lot. And now you're going to go, you already I've already been tiptoeing the direction. Well, not even tiptoe. I've already stepped in the direction. Barry's an asshole, but it's that thing of like, do you want him to get away from it? It's like, once again, I root for the villains. Like, you know, I was team Walter White all the way through. And yes, Walter White did some fucked up shit. So it's still that same thing of like, Barry's fucked up, but I'm almost kind of like, it's like Dad, it's like Joe, it's like, I'm like, what does it say about me when I'm like, the good guys who think the bad guys who think they're good guys, me wanting them to get away with it? I mean, because I think it's as long as I can recognize they're good people and not bad, that they're, Jesus, Freudian slip there. The fact is that I recognize them as bad people, and, you know, for story purposes, I'm like, I kind of want you to get away with it, you know? Once again, your Light Yagamis, your Raymond Reddingtons, your Barry Berkmans, your Marty and Wendy Bird. So, like, you know, terrible human beings. Once again, what does it say about me that I want them to get away with everything? So, which we've got the answers for some of the names I've dropped. So, it makes you wonder, once again, I'm inkling towards, like, I don't think Barry's going to survive this series. I think Barry's going to die, which I think is going to be interesting and ironic considering he's surviving this. Because I was almost wondering whether this was going to be like a Rasputin thing where, like, oh, you know, Rasputin wasn't, he was hung, he was poisoned, he was shot and drowned. Like, I think, wasn't the drowning what finally killed him? After everything else, they tried everything else to kill him, and I think it wasn't until the drowning. I could be mistaken. You know, world history isn't my forte, but that was always the thing that stuck out to me of, like, they did all that and still didn't kill the bastard. You know, so. But I get the feeling like after all that, Barry's finally going to. I don't know. Not unless the irony is going to be like, not unless we get like a Sopranos ending where it's like, oh, it's unclear what happens to Barry. I just get the feeling like spoiler's going to end up like Walt. I think he's going to die in the end. We'll see. I'll be surprised if things kind of work out for Barry, but I think he's going to end up dying in the end. Maybe it might even end with him potentially killing himself. I don't know. I thought it was interesting though, like I said before, he was in a trance, and the person who ended up finding him was Ryan's dad, and he took him. And the moment I saw in the background it was the hospital, I was like, oh, are you really going to drop Barry off? But he stays nearby because he hasn't decided yet. Does he want Barry to get help or not? And he talks about what happened with Ryan. I didn't bring this up in the episode because I didn't even think about it when it was first introduced when Fuchs went to Ryan's dad. But it's like, oh, what happened to Ryan? It's like, well, to be fair, Barry never actually killed Ryan. I wonder well, Fuchs knows the truth that the Chechens did it, or is he still under the impression Barry did it? Or is he just assuming, like, well, it doesn't matter, I'm going to chalk it up? Because to be fair, Barry didn't kill Ryan. He was going to. I mean, we still don't 100% know, but I mean, the Chechens took that choice from him, and he killed said Chechens. So, you know, sad thing is, like, everyone else has 100% right to go after Barry for killing their loved one, but he never actually killed Ryan. He was originally going to, but Ryan's the reason why Barry's here. But that's also the thing too of, like, Fuchs got in his head of, like, oh, Barry's living your son's dream. It's like, well, Barry didn't kill him. He was hired to kill him, but didn't. The Chechens did, and he ended up killing most of those Chechens involved. Obviously, the only one there at the time that's still alive is NoHo Hank. So. But for him, he just wanted to be reunited with his son. The moment he said that, I was like, are you about to kill yourself? And he does. So at the end, we see that Barry does get taken into the hospital, and Ryan's dad had killed himself. So we'll see what that turns into when the police get involved, because there are other angles to this. Fuchs stops by and visits Janice's dad to bring him into the fold and everything. And I love her dad being like, yeah, me and my people were captured in Nam, and I basically got inside my our captor's head, and I made him kill himself. And Fuchs was focused on that this time. It's like, you made him kill himself? I mean, was he depressed? He's like, you know, he said one of my, like, it was like a cousin of his. He told him he can't cook something the right way. Guy went out backyard and hung himself. I was like, Jesus. So he's trying to say, like, right, maybe it wasn't just you. I'm not trying to undersell your abilities, but maybe he killed himself for other reasons. And they pull up and the police are there. I'm like, oh, cool. So Jim was like, I don't believe anything coming out of this guy's mouth. But then it's like, oh, he says some guy named Barry Berkman. And it's like, oh, yeah, it's funny enough. Gene Cousineau said the same thing, which, of course, Jim would know that Gene was like, wait, Gene, the guy that was dating my daughter, said that. Huh, interesting. So now he latched onto that, and then Albert latched onto that too, and that's why he went to go interrogate Fuchs, because Fuchs didn't immediately recognize Albert until Albert told the story. So he's wondering, like, yo, is my boy Barry mixed up in this? He didn't know how Barry was mixed up in it, but then Fuchs is like, oh, your buddy Chris? Yeah, Barry killed him because he knew too much. It's like, yeah, God, shut up. You don't act like you're all innocent. Unless, I guess we're completely ignoring the fact is you admitted that you're the one that hooked him up with these jobs. You're also the one that suggested he killed Chris. But the moment, like, Albert finds out about that, he's on a revenge. It's like, dude, so many damn people are gunning for Barry. Fuchs is granted, the bikers, they're all dead from last episode because we even saw them. The mom and son, the mom shot the son, so we still haven't got the aftermath of that. Jim's on his way. Sharon thought she did it and ran away, so we don't know what the aftermath of that is. And also Ryan's dad killed himself. So there's still at least, what, three, technically like four pieces in play, all anti Barry, like people coming after him. So that's definitely going to be interesting. Let's see how that all plays out for him. Probably not good, especially because Albert's ready to kill him. Albert's got gun in hand, ready to pop Barry, which he now will probably be able to track down Barry because, oh, Barry's at the hospital. I wonder, is that going to be a situation where, like, maybe Sally's going to check on him and maybe she's going to bring him home before Albert can get to him? I don't know. Or maybe he's just going to fortunately check himself out at the time. Because the other cops are satisfied because they're like, oh, we got him. We got the Raven. This is the guy behind all of it. Once again, believing the whole Barry Berkman thing was BS. Then there's the whole situation with Gene and Annie. He's putting on the masterclass because I forgot to talk about that last episode, which is interesting. And I've seen previews for them, the commercials. I've never actually seen or taken a master class before, but I've seen, like, podcasts get advertised by, and I've seen ads on YouTube as well. So it's interesting. And I love that Annie's kind of directing and stuff. And I love she's talking, was it the Cheryl beside her? She's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't done this in like 21 years. It's like, hey, do you need to take a break? She's like, no, I don't want him to know. It's like, well, I won't tell him. And it's like, what's your name again? Cheryl. I was like, okay, let's go with Mark too. Okay. So it's like everything works out even later on when Jean's like, oh yeah, Annie, she's it's like, oh yeah, she made you look handsome. The guy was like, no. When Jean's agent was like listing off these adjectives, and he's like, oh, powerful, no. And he's like, tall. It's like, right, made you look like a giant. And so they're giving Annie job opportunities. And then Jim comes over and it's like, oh, Gene. Yeah, that guy. It's like, oh, yeah, you ran into the guy that Fuchs is pretending to be. And it's like, oh, cool, yeah. He's arrested. I took him to the cops. Like, yeah, he says that student of yours, Barry, did. He's like, no, Barry's a good person. And he notices the sweat on Gene's head. So he knows, like, oh, Gene's lying. He is very good at reading people. So, yeah. That's going to be interesting. So that's out there in the ether now, getting ready to happen. And then obviously we get a little tiny update with NoHo Hank that he's trying to find Cristobal. And I love that he stood there as the guy got a dart ready. And then when it happens, NoHo Hank's like, oh, I thought that's what was going to happen, but I didn't want to be rude. So now he's locked up, and that's going to get bad. There's someone in the cell of Crossform. Obviously, they're separated by a wall, but it's like that person's going to try and get out as well. So I don't know whether that's the guy that their boss that ran away, because everyone else is dead, isn't they? Aren't they? Well, there's a guy that because one of the guys went and blew up the cars when, like, the cops and the Bolivians got there, but there's still the other guy, and then there's the boss guy that NoHo Hank, like, responds to, the one that ended up leaving immediately, like, not unless they both got captured and that's who Hank was talking to, or not unless it was someone else, but because it wasn't Cristobal. I was like, oh, he's still trying to find Cristobal, so it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. It's going to be fascinating to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.